So this is lesson 2 of understanding your identity and purpose. So last week we talked about in the beginning and God's original intent for a family and the 4 rebellions. And this week we're talking about God. In the beginning, God creates a family through Abraham. And so he's establishing a covenant family. After the story of the final rebellion at the Tower of Babel, the book of Genesis tells the story of God choosing a people who are known as Israel. But the story doesn't begin with God picking a nation. No, first he chose a man, Abraham. And from this man, Abraham, he built or produced a nation. And the reason that I point this out and make the distinction is because it's not as if God just randomly chose Israel. He made Israel into a... Thank you. He made Israel into a great nation, and God doing this was a fulfillment of a promise he made to Abraham. Yes, sir.
So I have a real good question about that. So, so many people say that Jews are racially Jews, but yet from the very first, God chose Abraham because he obeyed and he listened.
That's right.
So why can't we say now that Jews are people that obey God?
That is.
Paul does say that.
Yeah,
Paul does say that.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a lot about that today, Mark. All right. God came to Abraham in a vision, and he asked Abraham to lech lecha. A Hebrew term translates to go forth, or literally go to yourself. This was God's call to Abraham to leave everything he knew behind, to leave his father's house, to leave the Babylonian system that he was living in, and the wicked priesthood that his father was a leader of, serving the Elohim of the other nations, to start a new life as directed by Yahweh. If I'm going too fast, let me know. In Genesis 18 and 19, Yahweh says, "For I have chosen him so that he will command his children and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing what is right and just, in order that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham what he has promised." Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham that if he would lay down his self-will and follow Yahweh's will for his life, he would make him the father of many nations. But here's the thing. Yahweh didn't tell Abraham ahead of time what his will for Abraham's life was. He didn't give him all the details of what life would look like if he followed Yahweh versus if he chose to go his own way. He didn't even promise him it would all be good. Abraham just had to trust that Yahweh's will for his life was better than his self-will and better than his own plans. And then he had to make a leap of faith to leave that old life behind. Abraham had to draw the conclusion that life as directed by Yahweh would be better than life absent of Yahweh. Genesis 15:6 says, "Abram believed Yahweh, and it was credited to him as righteousness." Abraham was faithful to Yahweh. And Abraham had a son named Isaac, which was the son of promise. Isaac had a son named Jacob, which later became known as Israel. His name was changed to Israel. He had 12 sons who became known as the 12 tribes of Israel. One of those sons was named Joseph. Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt and later became second in command to Pharaoh. Joseph brought his family to Egypt, where they lived abundantly for many generations until a Pharaoh rose up who didn't know Joseph, and he put the children of the tribes of Israel into slavery. God would raise up a man named Moses, a man from the tribe of Levi, who would deliver the children of Israel, which had now grown to a large nation. Once again, God would remind them of his purpose in and through them. Standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, Israel was informed that God had selected them not because of their numbers or their power, because indeed they were and have always been a fraction of the human population, and a distinctively minor power among the nations, but because he loves them. In Exodus 19, verses 4 through 6, he says, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice, and keep my covenant, then you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." This was the beginning of the covenant that was made between God and his chosen people. Later, this mantle upon Moses would be passed on to a man named Joshua, son of Nun, who led the children of Israel to conquer the promised land, which was before known as Canaan. Once the children of Israel grew comfortable and were enjoying the abundance of the land, they forgot Yahuwah, just as he had warned them that they would. This was known as the period of Judges. Yahuwah would remove his hand of protection. The people of surrounding lands would oppress Israel, and Israel would eventually cry out, and a deliverer would be raised up to rescue them. This pattern repeated over and over again until the time of Samuel the prophet. At the end of Samuel's life, the people of Israel determined they wanted a king like all the other nations. So God told Samuel, "The people have not rejected you, they have rejected me." Ezra, tell me when you're ready. Okay. "But he gave them the desire of their heart, and God made Saul the first king of Israel." Saul was a new convert, and the Bible warns against putting a new convert into places of leadership. King Saul failed as king, having to be reminded that God desires obedience over sacrifice.
You said that wrong.
Yeah, I was about to
Obedience, that's how you pronounce it.
Obedience.
Mm-hmm.
do that. I was about to say the same thing.
Next, God rose up a king in Israel after God's own heart. His name was David. God promised that David would always have an heir on Israel's throne because David was obedient and loyal to Yahuwah. David had a son named Solomon, and Solomon had a son who would reign after him named Rehoboam. This is where the real trouble started. Rehoboam took some bad advice from people his own age. He didn't listen to the wise counsel of the elders, and this caused the kingdom to split. It was prophesied to Solomon that this would happen during the reign of his son because of Solomon's error of worshiping other gods. 1 Kings 11:10-11 says, although he had warned Solomon explicitly not to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep Yahuwah's command. Then Yahuwah said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. God sent a prophet to a man named Jeroboam from the tribe of Ephraim. Jeroboam was the son of a widow woman, and he was a servant in Solomon's house. And that prophet told Jeroboam that God was going to give him 10 tribes to rule over that would be known as the northern kingdom of Israel. The tribes of Judah and Benjamin would remain under the rule of Rehoboam, Solomon's son. Rehoboam wanted to go to war against the 10 tribes to reunify them, and he was warned by a prophet, do not go to war against Israel, for this is of the Lord. So this is where the nation of Israel was split into 2 kingdoms, and they would never be unified in biblical history. But there is a promise that these 2 will become one in the hand of Messiah. Before we move any further, I want to reiterate some things to help you understand the rest of the story and the future prophecies. First, the nation of Israel was split into 2 kingdoms. One kingdom was made up of Judah and Benjamin and would be known collectively as Judah because Judah was the kingly tribe, the one that David came from. They are also sometimes referred to as the southern tribes or the southern kingdom. The other kingdom would become known as the northern tribes, and they were made up of the other 10 tribes of Israel: Asher, Dan, Ephraim, Gad, Issachar, Manasseh, Naphtali, Reuben, Simeon, and Zebulun. The first king of the 10 tribes was Jeroboam, who was from the tribe of Ephraim. and for this reason, they are sometimes also referred to collectively in Scripture as Ephraim. They are also known in the Scripture as Israel. Now, I want to clear up some other confusion. It's a lot to what Mark, we're going to talk about the whole construct of Jews a little bit.
Can you hold up just 1 second?
Yep. I'm not switching slides yet.
Other 10 tribes. Oh, we're not on more than 10.
Yes,
Okay,
you need to write those in. Everything on the
Other
slide.
10 tribes.
Yep.
Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm. People sometimes say that the Old Testament is the story of the Jews or the history of the Jews. They say the Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt. God delivered the Jews through Moses, and that the Jews received the law at the base of Mount Sinai, and the Jews went into the Promised Land. And while these sentences are all true, the problem is this is only 1/12 of the truth.
Half truth.
1/12.
Oh, yeah.
Can we go to the next slide, Steph?
Yeah, I just now realized that it was up there. I was, okay. Yes, go.
The Jews are from the tribe of Judah. The name Jew became a construct of those who were from the house of Judah, and the land they were from, Judea. The house of Judah was made up originally of the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and some Levites, and this southern kingdom became known as the Jews. However, by Jesus' day, there was also a false system of religion called Judaism. That was made up of extra-biblical teachings, extra-biblical rules and laws, extra-biblical doctrines, traditions, and commandments of men. And anyone who converts to this religion of Judaism today, no matter what nationality you are, also became known as a Jew. There were 11 other tribes that made up Israel. There were 11 other tribes enslaved in Egypt and delivered through Moses. And there were 11 other tribes that stood at Mount Sinai and received the covenant and went on to inherit the Promised Land. So the Old Testament is not just the history of the Jews, but it is in fact the history of the Israelites,
Yes.
all of Israel. So then in 1 Kings, this nation of Israel became split in two, much like how our nation, the United States, was split into two during the Civil War, becoming the North and the South, the North and the Southern states. The nation of Israel was split into two, becoming the nation of Judah, or the Southern Kingdom, and the nation of Israel, also known as Ephraim, or the Northern Kingdom. And these two never became one again. The Northern Kingdom, Israel, also called Ephraim, became so apostate, worshiping other gods and also worshiping Yahweh in an unauthorized way, mixing worship of Yahweh with idol worship, that Yahweh actually divorced them, using language of marriage. They had broken his covenant, and they were no longer his bride. In Hosea 1:9, he said, "Name him Lo-Ami, not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God." And in Hosea 8:8-9, he said, "Israel is swallowed up. Now they are among the nations like a worthless vessel. For they have gone up to Assyria like a wild donkey on its own. Ephraim has hired lovers." Between 733 and 721 BC, the northern kingdom, called Israel, or Ephraim in other scriptures, was carried into captivity by Assyria. The king of Assyria conquered many nations by forcing the people to disperse and resettle in distant lands, so that they could not easily unite against him. So people from other nations were brought to Israel to resettle there. 2 Kings 17:26 talks about this. So the king of Assyria was told, "The nations that you have carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the law of the God of the land. Therefore he has sent lions among them, and behold, they are killing them, because they do not know the law of the God of the land." The new inhabitants, which were non-Israelites, were moved to the lands of the northern kingdom of Israel, which is called Samaria, from which we get the word Samaritans. And they did not know how to worship Yahweh. People from ancient times believed gods were territorial, and this was in part true, as we already discussed last week. It is the sons of God who had dominion over certain nations. And these new people did not know how to worship Yahweh, who the Assyrians believed was the territorial God of Israel. And thus they believed he was sending lions to them to kill them for not worshiping him properly. Because of this, the king of Assyria sent priests from Israel back to Israel to teach these new people how to worship Yahweh. The problem? These priests were the apostate priests of Israel, who were worshiping Yahweh in the manner after Jeroboam, worshiping Yahweh with the 2 golden calves in an unauthorized way and not according to the way of the Torah, the law commanded to them. They were far removed from the Torah, which is the Hebrew word for God's instructions, and were not walking in the ways that he told them to go. So this was simply like the blind leading the blind. Of course, these new people were not aware of any of this, so they simply thought they were doing the right things. Deuteronomy 28:36 began to unfold. Yahweh will bring you and the king whom you set over you to a nation neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you will worship other gods, gods of wood and stone. And Isaiah 7:8 prophesied, for the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years Ephraim will be shattered as a people. And it did happen. They were so broken and dispersed, they were not able to unify or reunite, and they never returned to the land as one. They were scattered throughout the world. You would think that Judah, the southern kingdom, would have learned their lesson watching what their sister Ephraim, Israel, went through. But Jeremiah 3:8 says, she saw that for all the adulteries of that faithless one, Israel, I had sent her away with a decree of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she too went and played the whore. Did you get that caught?
Yeah, I think you might need to go back to the other slide.
Go back?
Yeah, go back one for them.
Too fast for you, huh? Here you go. Give you a minute.
He was working on it too.
Cover for the boys.
Ryan, I got your sons back.
Some of the other boys.
No, not them. There's something to do with them.
Okay.
This is so sad.
Yes, sir.
We were not taught this in regular church all those years.
Yep.
How were we not taught this?
Yeah. It's the whole Old Testament in a nutshell. I'm teaching you the whole Old Testament in a nutshell.
I don't get it.
Mark?
So it said something like, did it say that they were having lovers with having adultery with Assyria? Was that the term?
He says that they were having adultery. They were playing the whore. They went,
Right.
yeah,
So does that
with
mean,
the other gods.
Does that mean that they literally practiced that, or that just that they were corrupt and Assyria conquered them?
They worshipped other gods
Okay.
because that's what he says in other places. We're going to read a lot of those scriptures today, but yes, it's a covenant, a marriage covenant that we partake in. That's the language that he uses, is that so we'll get more into this next week, but when we accept Yeshua as our Savior, you are accepting the marriage covenant. But the Bible uses that language all throughout, right? It calls us his bride, right? And so you are married to Yeshua. And so that's not a new thing, in other words. That was always the plan, was that we were supposed to be his bride. But he says we took other lovers. So anytime we are unfaithful to his covenant, it is if we are committing adultery. So any unfaithfulness, so anywhere that you break the covenant, you have broken the covenant with him, the marriage covenant. All right. 2 Kings 17, verses 18 and 19 says, therefore Yahweh was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only. So Mark, to answer your question further, It wasn't after the fact. It was before he sent them away. He's saying he was angry, removed them out of his sight because that was the punishment. He removed them out of the land because they had broken his covenant. They had been unfaithful. But since the kingdom of Judah didn't learn their lesson, they were taken captive as well. But they were taken captive to Babylon by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. 2 Kings 20 verse 17 says, "Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up till this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left," says Yahweh. 2 Kings 24:20 says, "For because of the anger of Yahweh, it came to the point in Jerusalem and Judah that he cast them out from his presence." Jerusalem and the first temple were destroyed, and Judah was taken into captivity between 605 and 586 BC. They were in captivity for 70 years. And this is important. This was about 150 years after the northern kingdom went into captivity. So that's more than a generation. That's a few generations later.
So this makes sense about what you were talking about before when you were reading about the other people in the land, and there's lions coming in there. So there's other people that are there when all this is going on. That Israel's been taken away, and then for a little while Judah was taken away, but there's people there. And so somewhere in, I don't know if you gave a date when you were talking about all that, but somewhere in the midst of all of this, they're like, we don't know the God of this land, and then so then they sent for
the priests that they took away.
They were in Assyria, or they were in Babylon?
Wherever they took, because they dispersed them. So wherever they were, they went back and got those priests and brought them back to teach.
How to appease this God so we won't have lions come in. Okay. And so what they taught
Was wrong.
Accurate.
Right, because they were teaching the way of Jeroboam.
Okay.
All right. Has everybody got this slide? Because that's a lot on that one. All right. Jeremiah 29:10 promised Judah, "For thus says Yahweh, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place." And the southern kingdom did return, and they retained their identity. Yeah.
Marshall went through about 3 or 4 pins there.
Uh-oh. Yeah, we need to throw them away so we don't. Yeah, I got
I
more.
started to bring one too, Mark. I had an extra one. I didn't bring it.
I think this one.
Make sure that.
There's a whole bag behind the bar if that one doesn't work.
You got 50 more to go.
That's it.
All right.
Got 50
You need to go back?
You should just take the whole thing
Okay.
back, couldn't you?
That's probably what
Does it right?
I think so. Yeah.
It's
Okay, we're good. All right, so he promised them he would bring them back after 70 years. And the southern kingdom did return, and they retained their identity. They didn't just go into captivity and wait. They got on their faces, put on sackcloth and ashes, and fasted and prayed for their return to the land. Their return to Jerusalem is recorded in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And this was only the tribes of the southern kingdom, Judah. And here's an important fact that many don't know. Only 5% of the then current Jewish population went back.
You skipped Ezra.
Sorry, I skipped one. I'm sorry, I didn't highlight it for y'all. Yes, it's Ezra and Nehemiah. Good catch. I'll circle that. Nehemiah is Nehemia. EZRA. That's terrible, since you have a son with that name. Okay, good catch. Ezra and Nehemiah. Good, y'all are my guinea pigs. You're supposed to be showing me the error. All right, so this is important. Only 5% of the then current Jewish population went back. The others felt no need to uproot because Babylon had been their home their whole life. If you were under the age of 70, you had been born in Babylon. Think about that. Yeah. While they were in captivity, they had no memories of Jerusalem. And life was good for them in Babylon at this time. Once the few that made the journey arrived back in Jerusalem, they set to work rebuilding the temple of Yahweh. In Ezra 4, verses 1 through 3, it says, "When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for Yahweh, building a temple for Yahweh, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, 'Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do. And we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here.' But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses in Israel said to them, 'You have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to Yahweh, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us.' These who were offering to help were those outsiders from other nations who had been brought into Israel and taught to worship Yahweh in the wrong ways of Jeroboam by order of the king of Assyria. These were the ancestors of the Samaritans that we read about during the time of Yeshua. And those from the southern kingdom, Judah, would have nothing to do with them and their apostate ways of worshiping Yahweh. They wanted to obey the Father according to his law and build his temple according to what was written. It wasn't long after this, the southern kingdom became known as the Jews. And as I mentioned earlier, the name Jew became a construct of those who were from the house of Judah and the land from which they were from, Judea. Those living in the land of the northern tribes from other nations were known as the Samaritans. The Jews and the Samaritans hated one another and avoided one another because they disagreed in how to worship Yahweh. They each believed they were doing the right thing. And we can see proof of this when we read about the woman at the well. She said, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman from Samaria?" So she knew, why would you even talk to me? However, though Judah, the Jews, returned to the land, their heart did not return. They adopted men's traditions and doctrines of rabbis instead of returning to God's law, by adding to the law and then holding those man-made laws to a higher importance than Yahweh's law. While in the beginning this may have started out as a righteous thing with good intentions to put a fence around the laws so they wouldn't break the laws of Yahweh, they ended up breaking the law of Yahweh anyway. In their desire to not return to their wickedness and end up repeating history, they tried to make the people love God. You can actually, and here's a side note, you can actually see evidence of this as early as when they first came back with Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah, they were trying to buy and sell on the Sabbath. And he said, start locking the doors so that they can't come in here with their stuff. So that became the rule. And there's a whole write-up in Nehemiah where it talks about how they had to, when they needed to shut and lock the gates and when they could be opened. So obviously that was Nehemiah. He was trying to do the right thing, right? And he was the governor. He was trying to govern the people and tell them to do what was right. But here's a good example of you can't make people do what is right. It is an individual choice. And after many years of this, a few righteous men desiring for the whole to toe the line, they ended up with rabbis who acted more like rulers, elevating their own laws above that of Yahweh's and making Yahweh's ways so hard that the people couldn't live up to their expectations. Jeremiah 3 verse 10 says, "In spite of all this, her unfaithful sister Judah did not return to me with their whole heart, but in pretense, declares Yahweh." Pretense means making something appear to be true that is not. That's a perfect word. They were trying to make it appear that they were righteous, but in reality, it just wasn't so. So what about those northern tribes, those that did not belong to Judah, the non-Jews, those who were the other 10 tribes who were scattered, the house of Ephraim? They never returned, and they're still in exile to this day. Ezekiel prophesied, they wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. My sheep were scattered over all the face of the earth, with none to search or seek for them. So next I want to show you that this concept of Israel, or the 10 lost tribes of called Ephraim, still being in exile is not a fringe idea. They are prophesied to be scattered and then regathered at some point, and it's all over the scripture. First, in Genesis 48, verse 19, this is where Jacob blesses Joseph's son Ephraim. He was the second-born of Joseph, but Jacob gives him the firstborn blessing, and Joseph tried to correct Jacob, and the scripture says, but his father Jacob refused. I know, my son, I know, he said. He too shall become a people, and he too shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. The Hebrew here reads Melo HaGoyim, Melo HaGoyim, which means the fullness of the Gentiles.
Yes.
His offspring shall become the fullness of the Gentiles, is what that reads. In Romans 11, verses 25 through 26, Paul says, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that you will not be conceited. A hardening in part has come to Israel until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. So all Israel will be saved, as it is written. Wait a second. How is it that all of Israel will be saved when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in? Aren't those two different things? Because Paul understood this mystery. Paul was a trained Pharisee. He knew the scriptures on a scholarly level, so much so that this is why Peter warns that sometimes Paul's hard to understand and people confuse his words. Paul got his understanding from the Old Testament. He understood that Ephraim became the Gentiles when they were scattered throughout the nations when they went into exile. In fact, the scriptures actually say they were divorced by God and they took on a new identity, Gentile, which just means the nations. Do you remember the quote from the beginning of the lesson? Hosea 1:9 said, He, Yahuwah, said, Name him Lo-Ami, not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. And then in Hosea 8:9 says, Israel is swallowed up. Now they are among the nations, like a worthless vessel. For they have gone up to Assyria like a wild donkey on its own. Ephraim has hired lovers. And then Jeremiah prophesied this, My people have been lost sheep. Their shepherds have led them astray and turned them loose in the mountains. They have lost their way and can't remember how to get back to the sheepfold. Those who were in places of power and authority, those whose job it was to keep the Torah, write the Torah, and teach the Torah, had fallen down on the job. They were not following Yahweh's ways, and because of this, they had led many astray, and even more, many were dispersed into other nations. They became intermarried with the other Gentile nations, and they lost their way. What's worse, many lost their heritage, and they didn't even know where they came from. Thus, they can't remember how to get back. Ezekiel 34:6 prophesied, They wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. My sheep were scattered over all the face of the earth, with none to search or seek for them. But Yahweh said, Behold, I myself will search for my sheep and will seek them out. As a shepherd seeks out his flock when he is among his sheep that have been scattered, so will I seek out my sheep, and I will rescue them from all places where they have been scattered on a day of clouds and thick darkness. Ezekiel 34:11 through 12. In Jeremiah 31:9 through 10, Yahweh says, They will come with weeping, and by their supplication I will lead them. I will make them walk beside streams of waters on a level path where they will not stumble. For I am Israel's father, and Ephraim is my firstborn. Hear, O nations, the word of Yahweh, and proclaim it in distant coastlands. The one who scattered Israel will gather them, and keep them as a shepherd keeps his flock. And in Micah 2:12, This is where you need to start recording. I'll stop. That was the last one. Where it says other scriptures. This is one of them, the one I just read. Jeremiah 31, 9 through 10. That was the one I just read where it says, the one who scattered Israel will gather them and keep them as a shepherd keeps his flock. Bend your head, Eliana. There you go.
Yes, slouch.
You got that one?
Tells you not.
All right. And then in Micah 2:12, Yahweh said, I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel. I will set them together like sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men.
I'm still on this one.
Okay, I'll wait. Tell me when you're ready. You ready? All right. Ezekiel 11, 14 through 21. It's long, so it's got several slides, but you can start writing Ezekiel. Sound it out. Then the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, your brothers, your relatives, your fellow exiles, and the whole house of Israel are those of whom the people of Jerusalem have said, they are far away from Yahweh. This land has been given to us as a possession. Therefore declare that this is what Yahweh God says. Although I sent them far away among the nations and scattered them among the countries, yet for a little while I have been a sanctuary for them in the countries to which they have gone. Therefore declare that this is what Yahweh God says. I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you from the countries to which you have been scattered, and I will give back to you the land of Israel. When they return to it, they will remove all its detestable things and all its abominations, and I will give them singleness of heart and put a new spirit within them. I will remove their heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh, so that they may follow my statutes, keep my ordinances, and practice them. They will be my people, and I will be their God. 21, that's a typo.
This has
21.
not happened yet.
What is it?
21. Let's see if I can.
It's
Yep.
happening, it's in the process of happening, but it is not
Ezekiel
fulfilled
11.
completely.
Ezekiel 11, 14 through 21.
Going back.
All right. Yahweh says he will rescue his sheep that he scattered. Amos 9:9 says, For surely I will give the command, and I will shake the house of Israel among all the nations, as grain is sifted in a sieve, but not a pebble will reach the ground. Remember, when we see Israel, it often means the northern tribes, the 10 lost tribes, just as Judah means the southern tribes. And finally, in Ezekiel 36, 16 through 29, so this is Ezekiel again, chapter 36, another long passage. Again, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, when the people of Israel lived in their land, they defiled it by their own ways and deeds. Their behavior before me was like the uncleanness of a woman's impurity. So I poured out my wrath upon them because of the blood they had shed on the land, and because they had defiled it with their idols. I dispersed them among the nations, and they were scattered throughout the countries. I judged them according to their ways and deeds, and wherever they went among the nations, they profaned my holy name, because it was said of them, These are the people of Yahweh. Yet they had to leave his land. But I had concern for my holy name, which the house of Israel had profaned among the nations to which they had gone. Therefore tell the house of Israel that this is what Yahweh God says. It is not for your sake that I will act, O house of Israel, but for my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations to which you went. I will show the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, the name you have profaned among them. Then the nations will know that I am Yahuwah, declares Yahuwah God. Then when I show my holiness in you before their eyes. In you. For I will take you from among the nations and gather you out of all the countries, and I will bring you back into your own land. I will also sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and to carefully observe my ordinances. Then you will live in the land that I gave your forefathers. You will be my people, and I will be your God. I will save you from all your uncleanness. And finally, one last scripture, which is Ezekiel 30, the whole chapter of Ezekiel 37. Again, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, And you, son of man, take a single stick and write on it, belonging to Judah and to the Israelites associated with him. Then take another stick and write on it, belonging to Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and to all the house of Israel associated with him. Then join them together into one stick, so that they will become one in your hand. When your people ask you, Won't you explain to us what you mean by this? You are to tell them that this is what Yahweh God says. I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel associated with him, and I will put them together with the stick of Judah, and I will make them into a single stick, and they will become one in my hand. When the sticks on which you write are in your hand and in full view of the people, you are to tell them that this is what Yahweh God says. I will take the Israelites out of the other nations to which they have gone, and I will gather them from all around and bring them into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel, and one king will rule over all of them. Then they will no longer be two nations, and will never again be divided into two kingdoms. They will no longer defile themselves with their idols or detestable images, or with any of their transgressions. I will save them from all their apostasies by which they sinned, and I will cleanse them. Then they will be my people, and I will be their God. My servant David will be the king over them, and there will be one shepherd for all of them. They will follow my ordinances and keep and observe my statutes. They will live in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, where your fathers lived. They will live there forever, with their children and grandchildren, and my servant David will be their prince forever. And I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant. I will establish them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary among them forever. My dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations will know that I am Yahweh. Sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary is among them forever. We know that this prophecy has not yet been fulfilled. This is a prophecy of Yeshua's return, when he will return again to rule and reign. And as he establishes his kingdom here on earth, he will unite Ephraim, the 10 lost tribes, the Gentiles, and Judah, the Jews, into one new man, one body, one family, one people, under one king, Yeshua. And there will be a covenant of peace. Friends, if you are of the Gentile nations and your heart has been softened, the veil lifted, and you have received the gospel message, you are Ephraim. You are the lost sheep that has been found, that Yeshua left the 99 for. And this one new man, the house of Israel and the house of Ephraim, will receive a new covenant. You've probably heard a lot about the new covenant, but do you know who the scripture says that it's for? Jeremiah 31 through 34 says, Behold, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. And it will not be like the covenant I made with their fathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, a covenant they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yahweh. But this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yahweh. I will put my law in their minds and inscribe it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will each man teach his neighbor or his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, because they will all know me. From the least of them to the greatest, declares Yahweh. For I will forgive their iniquities and will remember their sins no more. This new covenant of forgiveness, of God placing his law in our minds and on our hearts, is only for the house of Judah and the house of Israel, Ephraim. So friends, you are Ephraim, and you are a part of Israel. We'll continue next week discussing how Yeshua's death and resurrection fits into all of this. This is the gospel message. It's about the restoration of God's family and what that means for you. It's about how you no longer have to be of the other nations, but you can be brought back into the family of God, and it comes with a whole lot of inheritance that most of the church has missed and is missing out on. That's it.